Hello everyone, welcome to Winthrop and the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is Linda Champion. Linda is a candidate for district attorney from Suffolk County, which represents here in Winthrop, Boston, Chelsea, Revere. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us just ahead of the election. Maybe if you could start out, Linda, tell people your background story, where you're from, how you got to the area, and why you're running for the office.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for having me here. Hello, Winthrop. I'm running to be your next Suffolk County District Attorney. I've been a lawyer for 25 years in this community. I have served in a bunch of different capacities. My recent public service experience is I represent actually the town of Winthrop. There's Chapter 32 retirement system. I'm one of the lawyers of record. I also served previously as the municipal and legal counsel to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. I love being a prosecutor. I love the work of the office. I'm committed to continuing to serve and would love to go back into that space.
Well, thank you. You mentioned some connection with Winthrop in terms of Chapter 32. Maybe you could briefly explain what you were referring to there?
Sure. So after I left the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, I became an attorney with a law firm, Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane. There I specialize in Chapter 32 work, and all that means is I represent public pension systems, and I serve as legal counsel to public pension systems across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
So, is there a legal case involving Winthrop's pension system?
Nope, no legal case involving Winthrop's pension system, but all retirement systems that manage public funds are required to have legal counsel to represent them. And so if anything should ever happen, they have a lawyer that they can look to and call upon to provide services.
Thank you. Okay. So the job of DA, again, we cover Suffolk County, Boston in this town, and two others. Why is that an important job for the people of Winthrop? In what way do the people of Winthrop maybe see what that office does affect their lives every day?
Yeah, so the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office is a very powerful position. It has the ability, and the DA selected has the ability to make a decision on whether or not to charge someone with a crime, whether or not to offer a person a diversion, whether or not a person gets a second chance or doesn't get a second chance. It is important because the position will change lives. And if you think about things that happen in your everyday day-to-day life, for example, one of the questions that often come up with children, for example, is the concept of a Romeo and Juliet romance. You might have someone who's a freshman in high school and they fall in love with a senior in high school, but the senior may be 18 going on 19 and the freshman may be 14 going on 15. But in Massachusetts, the law says that if you have sex with a person under the age of 16, that can be seen as statutory rape. So these are the types of the decisions that a district attorney has to make. They're tough decisions, and we have to make them on a case-by-case basis, but it's important to the everyday life of a person.
Right.
How decisions are made at the district attorney's office and its level will trickle down and impact community.
So, well, that's a really jarring example that you gave. How frequent is that maybe in an average year in Suffolk County?
Well, it can be frequent, and one of the things that was the most controversial thing in the 2022 election cycle was that the juvenile records of two victims were released, right? So these two young girls come forward and say, I think this happened to me, and an investigation took place. And those records were released, and they were released in the context of a political forum. And so you see these young people, these records are supposed to be sealed, but in that case, those young girls were saying, look, this happened to me, and this person who's also in high school did this to me.
Right.
So it does come up and it does happen. Or think of it another way. A young person has a romance that they love the person, but the parents completely disagree with this individual. And so who has guardianship over that individual? The parents. And so the parents can bring forward a complaint, regardless of what the young person is saying.
Right. So I gather it's a very case-by-case decision, but is there any way you can explain sort of your, briefly, I suppose, your thought process on how to approach that? I mean, is it a sort of do you err on one side or the other, or is there any way you can sort of summarize, your approach to that?
Sure. The approach you would take is you would be thoughtful in the approach. You would interview all of the individuals involved, and you have to determine, the age gap between them. You have to determine how they are in terms of levels of maturity and understanding. If you have someone who lacks the maturity to engage in a consensual relationship, I have to take that into consideration. I use as an example my own family and my own life. Me and my sisters were placed into foster care. One of the reasons we went into this foster care system was because my sister had gotten pregnant and had a baby by the time she was 14 years old. My mother, who was a Korean immigrant, and her community said, this is very bad that this child did this, and you have to send these kids away because they're all going to do the same thing. They're all going to get pregnant. And my mom, relying upon the advice of people, did just that. We all went into different homes and we lived without our parents because of this very bad thing that happened. It was all blamed on my sister. And, if you did the math, she got pregnant at 13, she had her first child at 14. And as I grew up to understand how these things happen, I realized she was just a child. How was it her fault, or how was it our fault that these things happened to us? And why do we then pay the price of that? And my sister ultimately had her baby, but then she was sent away, and she raised her child and lived alone and suffered through all of that ridicule and shame by herself, when in fact the person who put her in that position was over the age of 18. And I feel that those kinds of things are fundamentally wrong. And so we have to do a better job of understanding, which relationships we need a prosecutor to act on, and which types of relationships we need to say, yes, that's consensual, and let's not ruin someone's life with this kind of charge.
Right. So you've vividly told that story of your family history, but is there anything you can say about what the current DA is doing and how the current DA is handling these kinds of situations and how you might do it differently?
So the current DA, I don't think, has issued, at least to the best of my knowledge, I've not seen any policies or any conversations around these types of issues. The only thing I've seen come out recently in the current administration is the arrest and arraignment of Nurse Tan, and the arrest and arraignment of Dr. Todd. In the Dr. Todd case, there was women between the ages of 17 and 56 who were sexually assaulted at the hands of their healthcare provider. Right. And I believe, based on the timeline, it started somewhere in 2023 because District Attorney Mary Ann Ryan had a handful of victims, and she arrested him, had him arrested and arraigned in 2023. Right. The current office sat idle and did not make an arraignment until 2026 of this year in April. Okay. On the Nurse Tan side, Nurse Tan was arrested and arraigned, but his first complaint came in 2022. He was a nurse at Children's Hospital, and the second complaint came in 2025, and he was not brought in or arraigned until this past month.
Okay, so we obviously can't get into that level of detail in cases, but I mean, is there a summary you're saying? You're sort of suggesting
that we have to start paying attention to crimes against children, and we have to, when they come into the office, act with a level of diligence and speed. You don't want to have children violated and have a long turnaround time before we investigate, bring it before the grand jury, and issue an arraignment, but also issue a notice to the public.
So you're saying that the speed with which the current DA is prosecuting these kinds of cases is too slow?
Too slow.
And is there any way we can compare that to anything else that would tell us that would, like data-wise, that would say that this is the speed at which it normally happens and this is what the speed is going on, or anything like that that would help people sort of objectively assess that contention?
Sure. So if a complaint came in 2022 of a child who claims that someone hurt them or did something wrong to them while they were in the hospital, my position is this: if we act in a timely manner, the 2025 victim may not have ever happened.
Right. What I'm asking is, what's the normal? I mean, there's no normal, I suppose. It's all case specific.
There's no normal,
we,
but I would ask that my administration, when you have a complaint of child abuse come in or sexual assault, that we are acting within a 12-month period.
Okay.
And I think that acting and arraigning a case years later, 3-4 years later, is simply too long and not timely.
Okay. So the current DA is Kevin Hayden, the predecessor is Rachel Rollins, and she's running along with you against him. One of the things she apparently did was during her time was to, I think, and you correct me if I have it wrong, but it was sort of just define a set of crimes for which we would not prosecute because they were fundamentally unfair to certain communities. You know what I'm talking about. So maybe you could explain to people what she did and how you feel about that, what you think is going on now, and what you would do differently in that whole realm.
Yeah, so I think that with respect to cases, you can't have a blanket list of do not prosecute. Even if you want to work with the community and young people who may be doing things like shoplifting, I think the idea that you would say we will not prosecute any shoplifting is just wrong. We shouldn't be teaching our children that shoplifting is okay. But the other thing is, when we set policies as district attorneys, we have to understand the community impact. And what we saw in communities of color is that big organizations like the Walgreens, like the CVS, they did not have to tolerate that type of policy. What they did is they picked up, they packed up, and they moved out. And how does that hurt us? It hurts us because I have seniors in the community. Some of the seniors do not have smartphones. Some of them cannot read or write. Some of them need direct access to their pharmacist so they can explain to them how to take the medication so that they're safe. But more importantly, they need the ability to access their medication. They don't have credit cards. They don't know how to use the internet. They don't know how to do a mail-away prescription order. But if they're in an environment where they are worried about people taking their packages, some of them don't have the ability to man the door to make sure once the package is delivered that they can run out and get it. It puts people, particularly seniors, particularly those who can't walk or people who need assistance and help with reading and writing. Once you take and lose the pharmacies within the communities, it really has a devastating impact. We need those stores to come back. We need the pharmacists to come back, and we have to say that we will not be engaging in these types of policies anymore. Why? Because it's important that our seniors and people who need access to life-saving medication have it within walking distance of their homes.
And do we know how many pharmacies have been lost as a result of that policy?
So I've seen different studies. I can tell you that one key pharmacy in Roxbury left, and that was a major Walgreens, and there was a ton of protests to try to get them to stay. What I heard and read in a report was over 200 stores have closed in total, not just in Boston, but throughout the region as a result of these progressive policies that say we will not prosecute for shoplifting.
What about the idea that I think underlies it, which is that the legal system is slanted against certain communities, minority communities, and that something needs to be done about it? Do you see any validity to that that perspective?
I do see validity to that. I worked as a prosecutor. I was one of the few black women in the office at the time that I was a prosecutor early on in my career. I think that people see things differently based on their own lived and life experiences, and the only way to start combating implicit bias and tackling stereotypes and discrimination is to have diversity within the office, so people who are reviewing cases and talking about cases and looking at the best path forward on cases reflect the community that we serve. And
is that not the case right now in that office?
So no, that's not the case right now in that office. I mean, because some of it is also economics. To be a prosecutor, you know the cost of living right now in Suffolk County, it's very expensive. Right. And so to have the types of entry-level jobs as a lawyer, while a lawyer is trying to carry $200,000, $300,000 of student loan debt, you either need a family that can help support you so that you can serve and be a public servant, or you have to have a paycheck that can meet your day-to-day cost of living needs. So it's a delicate balance, but I think there's a way that we can do it. I'm excited to go in there. It's a $28 million budget. I know that there are ways we can readjust that budget so we can offer opportunities to people who are bilingual, people who can speak the different dialects that exist within the city. And we can offer more to people because we will have the ability to understand what each of the communities need, whether it's the Vietnamese community that may be reluctant to report things like domestic violence, or the Chinese community that may be reluctant to report when they're robbed and things are stolen from them.
So just not to oversimplify it, but are you suggesting maybe that the DA has this big a budget that maybe the DA could spend more money on fewer people and give them the staff a higher?
Sure.
Yeah.
The DA needs to readjust the personnel so that it can work, the office can work more efficiently. If you have someone who doesn't speak the language and you're seeing that the victims are coming in and they have a particular need, the office has to have the ability to make those adjustments. And we have to start early on, right, building forward. We have to start early on recruiting and training people who want to come into these professions and being deliberate about identifying individuals like the people in the Vietnamese community who may be in college right now, but could potentially have a pathway to going to law school and coming into the office to want to serve.
So all that you just discussed, I think we're talking very heavily from a Bostonish perspective because Boston is the 500-pound gorilla, I suppose, in Suffolk County. But does the equation or any of these considerations vary for a town like Winthrop that is obviously a bit different than Boston in some key ways? Anything you could say about that?
Yeah, so what we would care about communities like Winthrop is, as you know, anytime you see a waterway, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to things that may be coming into Winthrop that could impact the rest of the community, whether it's narcotics, whether it's drugs, whether it's human trafficking. People will come into spaces any way that they can, by bus, by boat, by train. But what I love about Winthrop, and one of the things that I love coming here, I love coming here because Winthrop doesn't have the same issues and concerns that Boston or Chelsea or Revere may have. People may not realize this, but just the fact that you can come into town and have the sound of peace. And it's, when you go into Boston, you have to think the community's dealing with sirens constantly, ambulances constantly, noise pollution constantly. And I wonder sometimes when I come here how tranquil it is, how peaceful it is. If people in other parts of the community, other parts of Suffolk County realize how important noise pollution is and how important it is to give people quality of life spaces where they can process what's going on around them, but also just have mental health and wellness.
But how does that, that sounds all right, but how does that amount to a difference in how the DA would handle a situation? I mean, are you suggesting in so many words that people in Boston maybe are entitled to a bit more malbehavior because they're subject to that, or what?
I think people in Boston are entitled to the same level of peace and tranquility and neighbors being neighbors that we see in Winthrop. I think every child in every neighborhood is deserving of that. Every child in every neighborhood should have the ability to walk down the street without worrying about bullies, without worrying about having to fight, without worrying about being robbed. And it's not to say that bad things don't happen in other communities, but I would love it if every child in the city of Boston could see what life could be like without all of the chaos.
Okay. I guess I'm looking for is how that would apply in terms of prosecutorial decisions and whether they would differ at all between a place like Boston and a crime that took place in Winthrop.
Yeah. So you look at a person and you look at all the context of what's taking place around them and how they are making decisions. A person in Winthrop may not be apprehensive or feel a threat coming upon them if they encounter a person on a daily basis. Where a student or a person in Boston may be on heightened alert and may feel a sense of a threat always approaching them, and could act in a way that could be, someone else may look at it and say, well, why did you act like that? Well, they act like that because every day they went to school, maybe they were bullied or beaten up. And so on the one day that they thought this was going to happen, and they might fight back. So I have to take those things into consideration.
Okay, okay. One thing I have to get to is the reason that, I understand, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the reason that you and Rachel Rollins are running against Kevin Hayden dates back to, I think it was March, with the shooting of the shooting by the Boston police officer of a carjacking suspect in Roxbury. Again, if I'm wrong about that, but it seems like up until that point, Kevin Hayden was going to run for re-election unopposed, and then after that shooting happened and his office charged that Boston police officer, that's when you and Rachel Rollins got into the race. Is that, you can't speak for her, but speaking for yourself, is that your understanding of the situation? Maybe explain why that process, if you will.
So I think for me the process was, and I don't know what the former district attorney's process was, but for me the process was quite simply this. I worked in the office, there were a lot of cases, and there were cases that people were coming up and asking, do you know anything about this case, or do you know the timeline of this case? What I saw on TV was an individual who was being arraigned in district court for the shooting of a gentleman by the name of Stevenson King. And the only thing that came to my mind was, one, that is horrific. Anytime you have the loss of life anywhere of anyone in our community, we do not want to lose people's lives. But what I thought about was, wow, this was really fast. And I thought
the charging of the Boston police officer was very quick.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought, wow, this was really fast. So if we can move that fast, if 8 days, we can move a case in 8 days to arrest and arraignment, then why are the other cases taking so long?
You're talking about some of the cases involving
Correct.
women.
The cases involving women. Women want to move on with their lives. They too want justice. And so why are we making the victims of sexual assault who are reporting this in 2023 wait 2024, 2025, 2026? If the standard is we do not have to convene the grand jury, then why do we have all these cases in queue waiting for the grand jury to take action on their case? If we can, let's take Dr. Todd, for example. Women between the ages of 17 and 56. They don't know each other.
So I don't think people are going to know these cases. So maybe briefly, is this a doctor that allegedly assaulted female patients?
Sure.
Is that what we're
So
talking
the
about?
Dr. Todd case is a case of a doctor at Brigham and Women's Hospital who the allegation is that he sexually assaulted women who were treating in his office. Those women were between the ages of 17 and 56 years old, and they were seeing him because he was a specialist. Complaints started to come in. And what we know to be true, because District Attorney Mary Ann Ryan in Middlesex County arraigned him in 2023. But in Suffolk County, even though there was knowledge that there were victims in Suffolk County, and we learned that through the Middlesex County case, there was no public service announcement to the women in Suffolk County. There was no arraignment of him on any of the charges in Suffolk County. And none of that occurred until I entered this race, and I said, well, wait a minute. If we can arraign a police officer in 8 days, then why are we making women wait years before the person they've identified as the person that hurt them, sexually assaulted them, is brought in to court to be arraigned and charged?
Okay. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of the DA, but I will say that you pointed out earlier these are much more complicated cases. The Boston police officer case, certainly complicated, I'm sure, but it's a case allegedly of an officer shooting somebody in daylight, essentially. And whereas the cases you're talking about, you described earlier, they're very complicated. Is that part of why a case like that, the Boston police officer might have gone quicker than these other ones? That there's just...
So all cases are complicated. Particularly, I would argue that they're both equally complicated.
Okay.
You have one that is the loss of life and the discharge of a firearm, more complicated because you have an officer in pursuit. Because he's in pursuit of a carjacking, and he's coming upon a scene. And so I would say you owe a duty of care. And as a prosecutor, I'm not the judge and jury of any situation. My job is to collect the evidence, to present the evidence to the grand jury in that case, and to allow the grand jury to render their findings. And if the grand jury says, yes, this person, based on the evidence you've presented, should be indicted, to bring that charge forward. My position is they're equally as complicated. We are not the judge and jury, and there's a process, and we have to follow the process. And I find it disturbing to me that you would deviate from process for this case. And my question is always and remains to this day, why? And that's why I've said release the tape so we can get a better understanding of why this case gets to go in a different direction than all other cases.
So when you say release the tapes, you're talking about release the videotapes of the shooting.
Correct. Release the tapes involving the death of Stephenson King.
Well, and what's your understanding of what's holding up the release of those videos?
So currently, the release of the videos is under a protective order, which is issued by, I believe, Judge Wall out of Superior Court. And it's my understanding that the protective order was put in place by agreement of all parties, including the Suffolk County District Attorney.
Okay, okay. Longer we could go on to it. Let's not. I think we're hearing you. It's one reason because one, it seems like it's the case that got you and the other challenger into the race, and two, it's been very political, around. Matter of fact, our local state representative has donated to the police officers. It's a political issue. I guess maybe that's the question asked then is, to what degree does it get difficult for a district attorney or people in that office when a case like this gets so high profile?
So the law is the law, and no one is above the law. And as a prosecutor, our job is to seek justice and to seek the truth. Our job is not to take political sides, and we're certainly not going to use people's lives to advance our own political agendas or careers. It's not right, it's wrong to do, and so I don't see it in a political lens. What I see it as, this is the law, here are the policies that we've given that people can use and rely upon, and when you deviate from it, you owe the public an explanation as to why.
Is it a good idea for the DA to be an elected position?
I say no, but that's my opinion. But here in Massachusetts, unfortunately, we're put in a position where you have to be elected, and so we have to go out and ask voters for their vote. But I do because of this very reason. It calls into question decisions that are made by a seated district attorney because the seat is an elected seat. I feel that if it was an appointed seat, district attorneys could do their jobs without thinking about how it's going to impact them on a political level.
So one thing this brings up is, as I'm sure you know, this race and previous ones at least have had some questions of propriety by the incumbent and by the other challenger in the race in terms of signature collection, using the power of the office to influence other races. Do you have anything to say about that and whether that's how big a deal that is, frankly?
So for me, it's a big deal. It's very difficult to run a political campaign. You have to, raise a significant amount of money, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. For me to hear that that signatures are submitted and they're fraudulent, it calls into question the entire process for me. I know for me, it was important for me to not only review every signature. I personally went to each town clerk or city clerk, elections divisions, and I personally turned in my own pages, and I picked up my own pages. And the reason for that is because you want to run a clean campaign. You don't want to send your state-funded employees down to do the work of your campaign because they have their own work to do.
Should there actually be a bar on staff at the DA working on political campaigns, even if they're doing it on their own time?
Yes, and my pledge and my policy will be that if elected and seated as the Suffolk County District Attorney, no member of my office staff will be allowed to make a donation, nor will they be allowed to work on my political campaign, whether they work on their comp time, personal time, vacation time. That time that they earned is for them, and it's not to advance someone else's political agenda. But more importantly, I mean, what do you say as an employee if your boss comes and tells you, I need you to go do this? You're putting people in a very difficult position, and it's simply not fair for them to be placed in that position. They shouldn't be working on anyone's political campaign, no matter how much they like their boss, because it puts other employees in the office at a complete disadvantage.
Okay, thank you. We're almost out, but I'm trying to squeeze in two quick ones, and this is a long one, but maybe you can get a quick answer, which is, back on the police shooting, I understand that there's a process in the DA's office to have a comprehensive review of any kind of police shooting before a decision is made, and that the previous DA included a citizen in that process. Could you talk about that process again? Not a lot of time, but hit the key point of whether you would keep that process adjusted in any way?
So I think that the proper thing to do in an officer-involved shooting is to do an inquest and to invite everyone in that needs to be there, including the person who is alleged to have done something wrong. We should have a conversation with everyone. We should look at all of the information, and then all of that information should be turned over to the grand jury for them to make a decision, and then for a charge or no charge. But the way that this was handled, I think, was fundamentally wrong, and it showed that there was no policy. But more importantly, the district attorney, the current district attorney, as it related to the body cam footage, said at the debate, I have no policy. He's been seated 5 years. There is no reason why that the office does not have a written policy on the release of body cam footage.
And what about the involvement of citizens, a citizen or multiple citizens in that process?
Typically, the citizens are people who are connected to the community. They're more seen as more like an advisor to the office. Why? Because in the event that, just say there was civil unrest or people wanted to protest the decision, you want to make sure that people in the community who are, have a connection, deep-rooted connection to the community, understand what's happening so that they can talk to the citizens. Typically it's clergy that are the citizens. It's typically not just a random individual, but it's people who do the work in the community each and every day to make the streets safe.
So you like that idea?
I do like that idea. I like that idea a lot.
Last one quickly, big one in a bunch of towns, the issue of flock cameras. These are these cameras that are on poles. There are some here in Winthrop, but as you know, it's a big issue right now in Massachusetts. Communities getting rid of them. Is there anything the DA has to say about that topic, whether that's a useful thing as far as the DA is concerned, whether it's a civil rights issue, anything?
So with respect to cameras, I've seen a lot of different things, whether it's cameras, shot spotter, or this camera that produces the decibels for sound, right? The reality is we have different views on how much information is too much information and whether or not we want our community to be under surveillance 24/7. The answer is, I think we need to make sure we have all the tools necessary to keep our community safe. But in the most recent case where these cameras were used to track the whereabouts of a woman, I think misuse of those cameras is dangerous for all of us. Right. And we need to make sure that district attorneys and the legislature put in place regulations, laws, and statutes to protect people when that information is misused. I think gathering information is fine. Everyone has a Ring camera now, or some sort of recording device, whether it's on their car or at their home. And so having different types of systems out in public spaces is no different than the private surveillance systems. But we need to make sure people are not misusing the data once it's collected.
Terrific. Linda Champion, candidate for Suffolk County District Attorney, thank you very much for the time.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And remember to vote.